Welcome to the future, everybody. Happy Friday to everybody who's tuning in. We are live on YouTube. On today's show, we have an industry heavyweight, a legend, a master of design. Who do we have on the show? We have Sagi Haviv, and you're going to want to know his story. Why is my deck not working? There we go. It's a good-looking man, very sharp, guys. And today we're going to talk about one of his ideas, which is why design is not love at first sight. In his philosophy, he's like, you don't need to like a logo right away, and there's a good chance you might not, because they believe in taking a long-term view. And it's difficult to do this, especially with clients these days, because everybody wants instantaneous likes. Well, this is driven by a belief, a fundamental belief that a trademark gains meaning and power over time. And if you don't know who Sagi Haviv is, you will after this show. He's a partner at Chermayeff Geismar Haviv. Of course, Sagi is one of those named partners right there. And they're known throughout the world for creating some of the most famous, iconic trademarks in the world, like the US Open, NBC, National Geographic, Showtime, oh my God, Barney's New York, Mobile. Maybe you've seen this icon for Chase and the bicentennial logo, something that some people have tattooed on their bodies, and the Environmental Protection Agency. If you guys want to find out more about them, go to cghnyc.com. I believe that's right. And you're going to see so many iconic marks. We were showing some of the non-designers here, excuse me, some of the logos they've created over the past 50 years. And they were just blown away. Like, no way, they made that logo and that one? Yes, they made all of those logos. Okay, Sagi Haviv is the go-to expert on logo design for Bloomberg Businessweek, Fast Company, How, and Print. He's spoken at TEDx, How Design, and Brand New Conferences, Princeton University Design Conference, Columbia Business School. He teaches fundamentals of logo design at the School of Visual Arts, NYC. Some very lucky students to have you as a teacher. He's co-authored 2 books, Identity in 2011 and Identity Standard Manual 2018. Guys, please help me welcome Sagi Haviv to the show. Woo! All right, he's looking good. He's ready to go. Now, Sagi, you're going to have to do more of the talking today because my voice, my voice is not holding up today. A little bit too much yelling at yesterday's party. So, how are you today?
Doing good, thank you.
Okay,
thanks for having me.
Excellent. Thank you very much for agreeing to do this. And it took a little coordination. I also want to thank Ben Burns for maybe tricking you to come on our show, but we'll take good care of you today. Okay, so I'm just going to launch in, and I'm going to ask a bunch of questions. You guys, if you're tuning in on YouTube, go ahead and start writing your comments. Matthew and Aaron and Ricky and Jonah will be monitoring your questions. Here's the first question. Let's just start off here. This is the big one. I just want to know the story. How did you end up at Chermayeff Geismar and, of course, Haviv now? And how is it you became a partner?
Yeah, I mean, I would say luck had a lot to do with it, but I'll just tell you a little bit about how it started. So when I was at Cooper Union studying design, I came across this book, I have it on my shelf, TM, Trademark Design by Chermayeff Geismar, which has a lot of, kind of simple, bold logos. And I was kind of mesmerized by all these shapes, these strong shapes, sharp silhouettes. But also I was like, kind of that reaction of like, wow, they did all these logos. So it kind of became my dream to work for them. And one of the partners at the time, Steph Geisbuehler, who actually, been with them for 30 years at that time, he came to teach at Cooper. So he was my teacher. So, I already planned my speech for the first class. I, came in and, worked for him. And I'm sitting there in the front row and he comes in and he goes, before anybody talks to me, I just want to let you know we're not hiring anybody.
He messed up your game plan.
Like, damn.
So wait, okay. Before you go on, I have to ask this question. Do you remember what you were going to say to him?
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, I admire you. I'll come work for you for free. Like, that's what I was going to say.
That was your sales pitch.
Yes. And, what do you have to lose?
Right.
So, after at the end of the year, he actually, had the idea to kind of all kinds of seniors presenting their portfolio. And he actually ended up inviting me to present my work at the company. And I came and I presented my work, and they still didn't call anything like that. So I started.
How dare they?
I sent him like email after email after email for like 2 months, begging, I'll come work for free. And finally, he said, okay, you can come for 3 days a week, no pay. And I just hung out there. And I was working, just to be noticed. Like I was the first one there in the morning. I was the last one to leave. And I, eventually, I guess somebody noticed me because suddenly the office was splitting up into two entities. One part more about exhibitions, the other part more about logos. And Steph was going one way, and Ivan Chermayeff and Tom Geismar were going another way. And I was really loyal, and Steph just assumed that I was going with him. But Ivan and Tom were like, well, want to come with us? And how do you say no to these two icons?
Oh, wow.
So a friend of mine told me, Sagi, just tell them you want to be a partner, and they'll say no, and then you can go with Steph. So I walked in and I said, I want to be a partner. And they were like, okay.
So that was it.
That was it.
Wow. Okay. That's a pretty dramatic change from, hey, I'll work for free. I'll do whatever. I'll work day in and night for free to, I'd love to come on board, but you got to make me a partner. So you've only been at the firm, I think, 2 years at that point?
Yeah.
And what year is this? I'm trying to get the chronology of all this.
2005.
2005. Wow.
And, I have to say, I was, like you hear things in your life that are said to you, and, certain things stick with you, and they can also help guide you. When I was graduating from Cooper, the commencement speech was given by Laurie Anderson. I don't know if you know who she is, the performance artist.
No, I do not.
And at the end of her speech, she said, I have one advice to the graduates. Don't wait to be asked. Go for yours, knock on the door, kick the door, whatever, do whatever you want. Don't expect people, or don't wait for people to recognize how great you are. Just go for it. And I think that that's a good advice for everybody. Sometimes you just need to have some chutzpah and just push your way in.
I get the sneaky suspicion, though, that way before you even heard this commencement speech, there's something about you that has the guts to be able to think, I've done my research, this professor is going to be teaching, I'm going to approach him right away. And I think there are a lot of people who have that same kind of admiration, but don't have that same drive or courage to go and ask. Is there any advice that you can give to that person who may be watching this and saying, yeah, I've always wanted to do that. I always wanted to approach somebody, but I just couldn't do it. I felt awkward. I just felt like an imposter, whatever they might be going through.
I would say this. You know how we all walk around with this feeling that like people around you like know something we don't know,
yes,
or like have had, they got it going on and we don't, and there's some secret that they're holding. They don't. I think you have to keep reminding yourself that you know best. And I have to say that working alongside Ivan Chermayeff, he is one of these people that never had that thought in his head that oh, I'm an imposter. It never crossed his mind. And that's very inspiring, to work alongside somebody like this that just always thought he knew better than everybody else. And that's a really great way to get through life.
It's interesting. I share a very similar philosophy, and a lot of creative people think, God, that's just being really arrogant. Aren't you just full of yourself? Isn't humility something that we should strive for? How do you respond to something like that?
Well, let me go back to Ivan for a moment, because he was a mentor at first, and then became a partner. And he had, in one way you could say that's so egotistical or whatever, but in fact he had this sort of humility in a way in the face of this principle of good design. So he would come, we worked together. So he would come with a sketch. He would be very excited about it. He's like, look, and whatever. And you would point to him a flaw with the sketch or something's wrong with it. He would drop it immediately. There would be no like fighting for his own sketch or anything like that. So I think that, you could have both. You could have both. I think you need to care about something. There needs to be something that you care about beyond the money that you make, beyond the client that you make happy. And for us, it's really design. Like the level of design, when I picked up this book, it was the level of design that they were able to maintain over all these years, all these decades. And I think that's because there was nothing more important to him than that, nothing, including his own ego.
So what I'm hearing you say, and I feel like I think the same things, which is self-confidence it's about believing in yourself and knowing who you are, but not the belief that you're always right. And I think a lot of people assume that to be self-confident, then you get into this arrogance thing and then you're always right and it's an ego thing. And I don't think that's it at all. Well, I'm going to take a slight detour here. No, you know what? I don't want to go there just yet. I just can't wait to show people this photo and talk about this. But
wait a minute. But I just want to say one more thing.
Yes.
When I design something, I show it, not just to, my partners. I show it to the entire office, literally. And I ask, what do you think? What do you think? And, Tom sometimes makes fun of me about that, but I like to gather a lot of opinions. I never assume that I know everything. But at the end of the day, you know which advice resonates with you, and then you make a decision. But getting a lot of opinions is always helpful.
Okay. The thing I wanted to ask you that I just remembered is, so when you accepted the position to be a partner as the agency was splitting, how did the former partner, is his name Steph?
Steph, yeah.
How did he take it? I mean, he brought you in. You're the one who begged him to come in and he accepted you. So how did he take it?
Not well, but with dignity, I would say that. And, Steph is an unbelievably good designer. And in fact, many of the logos that are in the company's portfolio were designed by him, including the NBC logo. So he's a great designer. And honestly, he was so, at the end of the day, so nice about it, nicer than other people would be, I have to say. And he's still a friend, and I admire him a lot.
And what emotionally was going on with you when you're thinking through this? Like, it's wonderful that you became a partner, but often a lot of times people don't want to talk about this, but there's an emotional decision that has to go on. And how did you resolve that within yourself?
That was very, very difficult. I would say, I know his wife. I mean, it was tough. But at the end of the day, I mean, I think that you have to also think about, doing right by more than just one. You have to think about where you're going to end up and how much can you contribute. Somebody said to me, you should go where you're needed the most. And I think that's good advice too. When, we always, we're always looking for talent, and there's always needs to be the right talent for the right place. Sometimes it's not redundancy. Sometimes it's somebody that brings in something that you don't have. And I think that for me, I realized that this is where I was needed the most. And so it was the right decision.
I love that. Thank you. All right, let's switch up the mood a little bit. I want to know how this young Eminem rap star who's wearing this puffy jacket, look at this here, how did this guy become this guy? Like, look at how sharp you are here. Fit, trim, three-piece suit, just a skinny tie, and just explain this to me. I don't get that.
I would say it's good friends. What happened was, I came from a kibbutz, and I came to New York, and I think I assimilated very quickly with the puffy coat and all that. Thanks for keeping it on this picture. I appreciate it. And then, suddenly when I became, part of the face of the firm, I had to clean up. So I have a very, very close friend named Stephen Campbell. He's a brilliant creative director and stylist, and he took me shopping. And he just, this, put this with this, and it works.
Look at that. So you had a friend who was a personal stylist for you. Once you became partner, like I got to look the part, right? And now every photo, every video interview I see of you, it's like you're just very sharp, very tailored. Is this now this is the only way to live?
Kind of. I mean, it's either this or sweatpants and flip-flops.
Mm-hmm.
There's no in between. So that's how it goes.
Perfect. Okay. Well, I'm going to do a little public service announcement here for everybody that's watching. And I think we have to ask you this question because I don't know of a more definitive voice to answer this. So here we go. Internet, are you guys ready? What is a good logo? And then in contrast, what is a bad logo? There's a lot of debate about this, and I hope you're going to be able to clear this up because a lot of people mess this up.
So I will start by saying there are a lot of misconceptions about logos. People think a logo should say a whole lot about us, or people should, logo should be pretty, or logo should, we should love our logo, or whatever. Actually, all these are not true at all. Mm-hmm. A good logo, really, there's three things that it needs to be. It needs to be appropriate, and by appropriate, that doesn't mean expressive. You shouldn't try to say a whole lot. It should just be appropriate in the feeling. So it's like a personality thing. It's the core idea and the feeling of it. So if it's in sport, maybe it's bold and dynamic. If it's in fashion, maybe it's elegant. It's a feeling. Mm-hmm. And the second one is that it will be distinctive and memorable. So unusual enough to persist in our mind. We see it once or twice. You can describe it to somebody or doodle it on a piece of paper. That's a good test. And then the third one, maybe the most important one, it needs to be simple, super, super simple. So it can be reproduced everywhere in tiny sizes and pixel formats and so on. And I think that the kind of the continuum on which we work is really between distinctiveness and simplicity. How special can we make it while still keeping it uncomplicated? How simple can we make it while not going and becoming generic? Because the answer to what is a bad logo is something that looks generic is a bad logo on the one hand. Mm-hmm. And on the other hand, something that's too complicated is the bad logo, mm-hmm. because it's going to fall apart in small sizes, in pixel formats and so on. So that's the magic, is finding that balance between something simple and something distinctive. And when we strike that balance, we know, we found the right solution, the one that we will push for.
Okay. I think this is a good opportunity for me to take a look at one of your books here. And you guys definitely need to check this out. So I'm going to play the video. While I play this, I just want to keep this idea about simplicity. You talked about a lot of things here. You mentioned, so let me play this. Is it playing? There we go. So you guys just look at that while we flip through. This is just some of the logos. And Sagi asked me before, I show every single page? No, it would take 3 hours for me to flip through every single page. So you talked about having the doodle test to see if it's memorable, that you're looking to capture the core idea or feeling, that it's not supposed to tell this whole story. In fact, it's supposed to do something quite different. And to try to find this balance between something that's distinctive yet simple, but that while maintaining that it's not keeping it not complicated and not generic. So when we look
that gets more and more difficult, mm-hmm. as time goes by, right? Because more and more simple forms are being claimed and owned and trademarked. So I joke with Tom Geismar, who did the Chase logo, that when he did that in 1960, you could do a blue octagon and run with it, mm-hmm. and no problem. Now we have to go to do a trademark search, and we work with global companies. Those, we need to check it in different regions, and it's always kind of you hold your breath until you get the report from the attorney to see if somebody else thought about the same thing I thought about.
Right. Well, how do you respond to some of these comments that when people see a very simple mark where it's based on geometric forms, that's now not too generic? Because I get that a lot, and I kind of scratch my head. I was like, where does this idea come from? What are they teaching kids in school these days, that a logo is supposed to do all these kinds of things? For example, if it's for a moving company, they want to show that there's a guy moving a box or a car that's moving really fast. And that's the antithesis to what I think you are saying, right?
Yeah. A logo is not communication. The logo is identification. The logo is the period at the end of the sentence. It is not the sentence itself. You can say a lot about yourself, in advertising, in marketing, whatever outreach, but the logo is meant to identify you strongly and clearly. And the less it says, the better. So, if you think about the best logos in the world, they say very little. I mean, I'll give example from our portfolio, the National Geographic yellow frame. It's so simple, and it works through familiarity. If you landed here from Mars yesterday and you didn't know anything about National Geographic, you would say, what the hell is this? It's just a yellow rectangle. It's nothing. But in fact, in combination with the name and through consistent use, over the years, it has become the perfect vessel for all the associations and feelings that people have with National Geographic. So you couldn't get more simple than this, right?
Right.
Also distinctive. So the distinction is the color, it's the proportion, it's the relationship to the name. You have to think about distinction, of course, but you try to, really drill all the way to the simplest possible form and to peel away anything extraneous. And honestly, this thing grew out of the magazine, right? So it had a meaning originally.
Right.
But how many people in the younger generations now even know that it was a magazine, or that it is a magazine, or what is a magazine? You get the point.
Does the yellow frame, the rectangle that you talked about, does that come from the magazine first, or was the identity created in conjunction with when the magazine launched?
No, it started with the magazine.
Okay.
It was a graphic element on the cover of the magazine.
So this is where research and history and preserving brand equity and transferring that over so that there's a reference to the roots and the history of National Geographic as a magazine, right?
That's right. And research at the time, showed that the color yellow was globally associated with National Geographic more than any other brand. Even, Kodak at the time was yellow. But really, National Geographic was the most associated with yellow, so it was clear that that was the right way to do it, to preserve the equity and emphasize it.
Now, I'm going to channel our audience a little bit, but I imagine with the kinds of clients that you have today, that when you present a simple mark, even if it's a battle at the beginning, and we're going to get into that in a little bit, that a lot of people would then say, like, especially when you're dealing with smaller clients, they're like, well, that was easy. How long did that take? Why am I paying you more than $500 to do this? Do you ever run into that? And how would you advise younger designers who are starting out and are working with clients that don't have that level of sophistication to understand that we are trying to find something very reductive and very simple?
Yeah. I mean, simplicity is the hardest thing, right? To make something simple that's still ownable is the hardest thing. You lose my...
Oh, we lost your signal for some reason.
I think you're going to get it back in a second.
Right. Okay. We'll cut to this. There we go.
I just needed time to think.
It's very clever.
And with that, I do think that there is such a thing as, and I mentioned that before, in terms of people coming to work for you. Also, when you go to work for somebody, there is such thing as the wrong client. If a client cannot appreciate how important, on the one hand, the logo is to their business, and the logo is not important to every business.
Right.
Certain businesses, it's very important. And so on the one hand, and on the other hand, the level of complexity in, the process you have to go through to arrive at something that then can stick around for a long time. I mean, the point of a logo is to endure, right? And how do we know now what's going to still work many years in the future? Well, that's a level of expertise that, is not possessed by everybody. And, for us, we do every once in a while recognize that somebody is not the right client for us. And then we say, thank you, but not thank you. There has to be an understanding on the other side as well about the value you bring to the table and a level of expertise.
There's so many follow-up questions here. I hope people who are watching this on live or later on, they're going to comment and ask this. But I'm going to do my best right now to try to channel what it is that you guys are thinking when you hear this, because obviously Sagi's at such a high level. He's dealing with clients and he can afford to be choosy. They've written the book on trademarks, literally, and they have so many examples. So the natural default response that somebody's going to have is, well, they can claim that. They can go and make these bold statements. They can choose to be picky. And they can choose to make the argument that simplicity is the hardest thing, but it's hard to kind of say if you're in a developing country and you're trying to just work with a mom and pop shop and they need a new logo and they feel like that it being simple is cheap. And how can you respond to that? Like, can you take yourself back to like when you were in your M&M days and you're just getting started and you've been dropped in some other country and now you have to kind of sell what it is that you know? How would you adapt?
I think you know, one way to get through to people is to show them what other people are doing, what other companies are doing.
Ooh,
and
good tip.
So, you know, if you come back and say, look at the biggest companies in the world. The bigger the company, the simpler the logo. That means that simplicity is, you know, there's something right about that because these big companies recognize that. Right? Look at Apple, look at Nike. You know, simplicity works. You know, in some way, you know, we found that that's a very helpful way to get people along, you know, help them along to understand the value of something. Because when they think about themselves, you know, they're all wrapped up in their own world and, you know, emotions. And sometimes they might, you know, like something that they made or whatever. Then you kind of diffuse that by going outside and saying, well, look at these famous brands. What do they have in common? Their logo is simple. Well, that's what you guys need. And, you know, that's very hard to achieve. So maybe that's one way to do it.
Okay. Matthew, are we getting some questions from YouTube? And maybe this is a good time to talk about this before I ask you some more difficult questions.
Yeah, we are getting questions, but I think a lot of them actually are being addressed.
I think they
are,
right?
Through the conversation that you and Sagi are having, I think, Chris, you're doing a good job of channeling our audience. I know some money questions are starting to come up when people look at you, Sagi, and you look at the clients you've worked with. A lot of people are wondering, you know, what do brand engagements like that look like it cost-wise? And I don't know if you're comfortable with speaking about that at all, but I think people, their imaginations are going wild right now.
As I can imagine.
Yeah.
Sagi, can you process all that?
I'll say one thing. You know, we are independent. We're not, you know, owned by any big agency. We, you know, Ivan and Tom all these years really kind of were very adamant about staying independent because we care about good design, and that's the highest kind of principle, right? So then what happens is that there will be projects that we're interested in that maybe, you know, can't pay very much, and we will take those on, even if, you know, we don't charge as much because there's something exciting about it, because it's doing something good for society, because, you know, all kinds of reasons. So I'm not going to answer numbers, but I will say that we have a sliding scale. And, you know, what we would charge a large corporation that can pay is not the same as what we would charge, you know, a nonprofit that maybe needs our help and we believe in their mission.
How do you gauge that what a client can pay? I think what you're saying is charge the client and not the job. So how do you gauge that? Just as a philosophy or approach without getting into numbers.
You mean what they can pay?
Yeah. How do you determine what they can pay? Do you just say like, oh, that's a really big company. They're a bank. They should be able to, and that's a not for profit. So they can afford less, or we believe in their cause and their mission. Therefore, we can charge less.
Well, it's actually the calculation or the equation is a little bit more complicated than that. We say, you know, we put all things on the table, like, you know, do they seem like a good client that will allow us to create something good? That's one. Two is, you know, is it going to be very visible? So, you know, that is kind of a consideration also. And then we say, you know, is this a very difficult design problem? Like, you know, some problems are more difficult than others. And then based on all this, we say, okay, based on all this, we should, you know, charge them a lot, or we should charge them little. And then that's the amount. And if they want it, they take it. And if they don't, they don't. We're not trying to gauge like, oh, how much money did this guy have in the bank?
Oh, I see.
And let's go for it.
So it sounds like it's very intuitive and based on feeling or gut.
It absolutely is.
And are you the person driving this, or is there an account exec person who's like, yeah, I kind of feel like this is what we should do, Sagi, or do you determine that?
So we don't have account executives. We don't believe in middlemen or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
We communicate with our clients directly, and we do the design work also. I mean, we have a great team here of designers, and some of the most famous logos that came out of the shop were done by a designer, even an intern in the office. So it's kind of like a family that everybody works together on every project.
Mm-hmm.
So, but if you're asking about like pricing and stuff and how we price things, we price it in conversation between the principals. Like, we do everything basically.
Wow. That's different. Okay.
Yeah,
Matthew?
we don't, we don't like not having a sounding board. We like to, the collaborative work environment that Ivan and Tom established from the very beginning is really about checking each other all the time, looking at each other's work, barging into the room saying, well, why are you doing this? Didn't you try and say not to use circles? And it's like, well, but I was thinking that circle is actually what they need. Well, but did you try it, in red, or did you try it thicker? And then suddenly things get, much better. That whole attitude of like, we're in it together goes to everything.
Mm-hmm. Great. Matthew, you got another question?
I do. I'm trying to process a way to ask this.
Okay.
So there's been a couple of questions about dynamic or fluid or responsive logos, because I think that's what's happening today with so many screens, so many applications. There's so many different ways that a logo could appear across the board. And I think you did a fantastic job about telling people what the purpose of a logo is, and that was so profound, like everybody's mind was blown on the stream. So I was just wondering, Haviv, if you have any thoughts on maybe how to design those types of systems, or if you have any just thoughts in general around that.
So I would just encourage caution on that. And the reason is that the point of a logo is to kind of stick in your head, right? Mm-hmm. That silhouette needs to be seen as consistently as possible in order to, build equity and become a valuable asset. And I know, Chris, you wanted to talk about Chase later on, and mm-hmm. we can talk about that. But the idea of, a simple silhouette that stays with you, it costs a lot of money to, get in people's faces, through advertising, through all kinds of marketing, whatever media, you're trying to get to people. Mm-hmm. So to start to kind of compromise the silhouette in different ways is dangerous. So I know, there's a lot of talk about fluid and, flexible identities and all that. We're kind of suspicious about that. And it's not that we don't see the value in a lively system, but other things can change other than the logo, right? There are a million things around the logo. Actually, you look at a website, the logo is the least amount of pixels on that site than everything else: photography, graphic elements, typography, colors, everything else can change. The logo needs to be consistent. And that's what we believe. And that's why we put a lot of effort into coming up with this distinctive silhouette so that it can take on different treatments, different colors sometimes, different production methods. If it's in 3D, if it's without the color, if it, you want to apply a gradient. I mean, I think that, the NBC logo is a good example of, a logo that really gets every treatment in the book and still looks the same everywhere because the silhouette is distinctive. Mm-hmm. So that's why, we're a little bit, reluctant to go and, change the silhouette or create what you mentioned, like fluid or whatever. I mean, the fluidity from our standpoint is that we create such a distinctive, bold silhouette that you can use it anywhere and it's still going to be the same silhouette. That's the advantage of a logo. And, people make fun like, oh, it's a slap-on logo. Slap-on logo is the best compliment you can give a logo, because that means, you can slap it on anything and it's going to look great. And that's what we're going for. That's what we work toward. And that's why when we come back to the client with design options, they're always applied across the board. But we are careful about not getting too much into a visual language that's going to be mesmerizing for the client and obscure the fact that the logo actually relies on a visual language. Visual language will change over time. A website design would change over time, faster than you think. The logo should never have to change. And that's why, we really try to stick to coming up with a silhouette that's ownable, that's appropriate, and, all the other criteria I mentioned.
I never even heard that term before, and now it makes total sense. And how you call it like a slap-on logo. I thought you were talking about that's a slap on talking about logos. Like you're dissing all the people who thought of logo as one thing, but what you're saying is like it should just be able to work on everything, and that makes a lot of sense. And I didn't say this at the beginning of the show; it was a conversation Sagi and I were having before, and I just want to appreciate you for a second because Sagi sent me this massive deck. It was like a gigabyte, and I was opening it up and I was copying into my deck, and every time I would copy the assets over, it would crash my keynote. And the reason was his deck is in 4K, his images are probably 8K. It's just so out of control. But as I'm going through your deck, I noticed that when you're presenting your logo, or at least the case studies, that the logo itself was slapped on a bunch of different images. And I was like, I wonder why he's doing that. Now it makes total sense. Okay.
You're doing it because the logo will never be seen on a white piece of paper and a white screen. And ultimately, the logo is like, a baby that's born, and you pass it on to your client. And you don't know how your client is going to use it. I mean, you're going to put in place guidelines, and you hope that they follow the rules about minimum size and minimum space around the logo and all that good stuff. But ultimately, any type of strict system or whatever that you put together is either going to have to change over time because the organization evolves, the company goes into new areas, new regions, whatever, new leadership. And you never want that logo to change. So you have to show them that it's foolproof, that whatever happens around it, it holds its own.
I'm making some notes here for my show recap. I'm writing frantically to try and keep up with you, Sagi. That's why you may be seeing me turn away from time to time or even banging away on my keyboard here. Okay, let's transition a little bit. I have more questions than we have time, so I'm going to try and get as many of these in as possible. So in your TED Talk, Visual Identities, More Than Just a Logo, I recommend you guys go check that out. You talked about 2 stories about how the client hated the logo, but somehow you managed to persevere, and I'd love for you to tell us that story.
Well, this happens more than you would expect, and just the other day, we presented a logo to a CEO of a very large corporation, and we showed, 5 options, and everybody was sitting around the table, and then we finished the presentation, and then everybody was looking to the CEO to see what he was going to say. And he was looking at the options and said, well, I can live with any of them except number 2. I hate number 2. And then an hour later into the discussion, he wanted number 2, and he wouldn't hear anything else. And that's the logo that they went with. These things take time. And seeing logos for the first time, which is basically the story of our practice, is we present logos for the first time to clients. That's kind of an absurd exercise because, as I said before, these things work with familiarity. So if you were a client and you come into our office after 2 months of giving us time to work on your project, and we put in front of you a bunch of things that you don't recognize, then it becomes very personal. Oh, I don't like sharp corners. Oh, I don't like blue. I like red. Those are meaningless. All kinds of reactions that are instantaneous are meaningless. And maybe by telling the first story, it's going to become more evident. So maybe I'll tell the story about Chase. And then we can.
All right, and I'll track along with slides as you talk.
Sure, and obviously this happened before I was born. So I heard this story many times from Tom, and Ivan. And, that's a story that taught us a lot. So this happened in 1960, right? Very different world, no internet, no computers, no social media. And the Chase National Bank and the Manhattan Company merged to create the second largest bank in the United States at the time, Chase Manhattan Bank. And they were building the first skyscraper downtown Manhattan. There was a lot going on there in the company. And the bank was controlled by three people. John McCloy was the chairman. George Champion was the second in command, the president. And the third in command, David Rockefeller, who was an art collector on the board of the Museum of Modern Art. And he realized that that logo that they had that you're showing right now was a disaster. It had the map of the United States. It says worldwide banking. In case you don't get it, also shows the globe. It tries to say a lot, which is what we said was kind of a bad idea. So David Rockefeller brought in Ivan Chermayeff and Tom Geismar back then, in their 20s, to take a look at the logo. And they realized very quickly that there is no one-to-one representation of banking or finance. Is it bags of money? Is it a dollar sign? What is it? So they thought, in the absence of a direct representation, maybe with the constant exposure of the bank in newspaper, advertising every day and so on, maybe they can establish something abstract that over time can become, the meaning, take on the meaning of the bank. So they came back with, they did a lot of sketches and, all kinds of geometric shapes. This is actually an original sketch from Tom. And, ultimately they came back with some options. They showed them 10 different options. But really this design of the octagon was favored by David Rockefeller, who had kind of a trained eye for visuals. So, David was trying to push for it, but John McCloy, the chairman, was like, what the hell is this? What does it mean? It's not us. He said, why couldn't we do a picture of the building as our logo? He was so proud of his building. So David Rockefeller said, well, every building looks the same. It's not going to be distinctive enough. And the conversation went on for a couple of hours around the table. And finally, after a lot of pressure, John McCloy said to David Rockefeller, he said, okay, David, if you want it, you can have it for the retail bank. But I don't want to see it in my office. I don't want to see it on my letterhead. I don't want to see it on my business card. I hate this thing.
Wow.
So the bank went ahead and adopted this logo. It was a very big deal. And 6 months later, Ivan and Tom ran into the chairman, John McCloy, in the hallway of the bank. And as they were walking toward him, they realized he's wearing a tie with a pattern of the logo and cufflinks of the logo and even baseball cap with the logo. Yeah, this was Photoshop. But
it makes a good point.
Then, very quickly, it had become the representation of his bank. And he felt a sense of ownership. Mm-hmm. And that's a great lesson for us that first impressions can be misleading. And you shouldn't put too much stake in, what people think about the logo first off. And, in fact, people, sometimes companies come to us and they're like, well, how are you going to test a new logo? We want to put it in front of consumers. And we say, we would never do that. And that would be a make or break for us because it's meaningless, not because we don't feel like doing it, but because that doesn't help. We feel that our expertise about identity, what makes a good logo, and the client's expertise about their business, about their industry, that combination is enough to gauge which is the best option for them to adopt. Mm-hmm. This logo, this logo has been around now for, obviously many decades. And with the change of name, change of ownership, the constant thing is this symbol. Mm. And it kind of works really well in all the applications that could never have been anticipated back then. And it's funny because, the approach to make something bold and distinctive back then was because of limitations of production. The half-tone screen in black and white reproduction in newspaper and so on. So it really had to be simple. Now, these simple marks kind of thrive in the kind of limitless possibilities of reproduction online and, in apps and so on. And they really cut through the clutter. And that's, kind of the magical thing that they couldn't even anticipate it.
I think that's the beauty of you guys and what you do, is that the mark can endure over time for applications that have yet to be invented. And I've seen this, and I know what you're talking about, because back in the day, printing reproduction wasn't great, so the logos needed to be simple. It could be printed in a phone book, and it's very cheap printing. And then we've gone through this arc of like high fidelity, high rendering, 24-bit color, and then we seem to be going back to this simplicity, because now you have to create a mark that's the size, I don't know, like 3 pinheads put together for a web browser.
Exactly.
So it's gone full circle.
That's right. And when in the late 90s, when there was the rise of the 3D and, gradients and all that, and, there was, if you really stick to the silhouette, then it could take on those treatments and still be distinctive. But it doesn't go the other way around. If you design in, 3D, or if you design in, using all these gradients and it really relies on the stuff, then suddenly the trend passes. If you remember early 2000s, like, Google became flat, Apple became flat, Microsoft came out with their flat logo. Even then, UPS, we're looking at them like, oh my God, we need to be flat. And then they flattened it, and they kind of, it's all trends. So to be resilient to the trend, we try to ignore the trend and really try to stick to a silhouette that will, stand, the test of time, no matter what is coming next.
I think in that talk that you had said that the world has changed, but your process fundamentally has not changed. And it just kind of reminds me of a film, Jiro Dreams of Sushi. And at first, he's considered like a master of sushi, and he talks about trying to do something consistently the same day after day, week after week. And I started to go from like, why would you want to do that? That would suck, to, wow, I have great admiration for somebody that wants to just refine and perfect something and doesn't bend to what the world wants and follows a trend. And I think that's the reason why some of the trademarks that you created are so well recognized and famous around the world and haven't needed to be updated.
Well, we really try to, because I think going back to one of your questions before about like, how do you make the case for what you charge or whatever, you can say, look, the idea is that this thing lasts for, X number of years, divide whatever it is that you charge by the number of years, and it doesn't sound so high anymore.
That's a good formula. I like that. I'm going to add that to my sales talk now.
That's fantastic. Chris and Haviv, I have a question here from the audience. And
Okay.
I think it'd be interesting because I love you telling us, what's the distinction between a good logo, a bad logo, and then obviously along the way with this chase story, some of the clients in the rooms, the stakeholders in the room didn't fully agree with the bold mark that was presented to them. So for our audience who are working with clients who the clients may have either irrelevant or bad suggestions for the design, assuming the designer knows better and has done their research, how might they present the logo in a better way, or how might they tell the clients that their suggestions are either invalid or bad?
Yeah, no, that's a tough one. We start every presentation with kind of a list of warnings. And the first one, like literally the first slide, it says big on the screen, it's never love at first sight.
I love that.
And then, the clients that try to be funny, they're like, oh, you're trying to make excuses already? And we're like, no, this is just a warning that we give ourselves as well. You have to give it some time. And then we go into, and we say, a good logo is not about what you like or dislike. It's about what works. And then we try to take out all the subjectivity from the discussion so that we really can look at functionality. And if the logo functions, then, it will grow on them over time. So that's the idea. And, honestly, we show the example of the National Geographic logo, and we say, because everybody knows the logo, everybody, kind of, likes the logo. And then, you kind of lead them with that. And I think that it doesn't matter if you are, a small design studio or a large company, you can always use examples of successful logos out there, show it to your client and say, and talk about the properties of the logo to educate them a little bit. And don't be afraid to have a strong opinion. You come in with conviction, you'll see they'll respond to it.
I think that's a great tip. I really do. And I so many questions there. I'm kind of losing myself in all the information you're dropping. I just want to say.
Do you want to hear the second story?
I do. I do want to hear the second story. Now, thanks for asking me that. Do you use your own Chase story in client presentations where you're like, here's what happened with Chase? Do you use that in the presentation?
Absolutely.
Okay.
But we use it. It's like in case of emergency, break the box.
Yes.
So if a client is really reluctant, then it's like, okay, let me bring out Tom Geismar. He comes in, he's like, tells them the story, and it never fails. It always works. So it's just like, oh, okay.
So Tom is the nuclear option or the trump card that you play, and if all else fails, you break him out.
Totally, and I promise you, he tells this story much better than me.
Okay, let's talk about the second one that you talked about in your TED Talk, where the clients push back.
So that's 50 years apart, almost on the, really on the month, those two stories. And it's unbelievable how, clients are the same. And first of all, we love our clients. And we especially love Conservation International because they are really the leader in the environmental work around the world. And they came to us with a logo that was, very, very complicated. And from our standpoint, you had the question before, like, what's a bad logo? This.
Ooh, that's a slap on that logo, Matthew.
Well, and the thing is, they love this logo, and and you can understand why. They had it for 30 years. The monkey hanging in the tree was hand painted by the president of the organization, who's a primatologist, an expert in monkeys. Hand painted the logo into the monkey into the logo, so you can imagine the level of attachment, and it's worked for them, for all these years. So why change? Because their mission shifted at that time from focusing on hotspots, specific issues that are, in different parts of the world, this animal, this species, this tree or whatever, to issues that affect humans globally. So really no longer, a focus on this or that, but really trying to focus about fresh food, fresh water, farmlands, even cities. And, this logo, obviously the hut is empty. There's no human in there. And so that was an opportunity, to move away from something that looks like Club Med and do something that, maybe has some, gravitas. We thought that the leader in the world in this kind of, oh, you lost me again. Sorry. That the leader can really use something that has the potential to become iconic over time. So we, went into explorations. We kind of came up with many, many different ideas. We always look at in many directions. And ultimately, the idea of the blue planet with a green underline, so kind of an underline and emphasis, when you underline something, you emphasize it. And then we translated that into a single weight stroke. And it ended up as a kind of a simple archetypical symbol that didn't look familiar to us. I mean, it's very simple. It's a circle and a line. It's extremely abstract. But with the color, you can kind of do a signpost, point people at, okay, the blue planet, a green, some of them thought of it as a green sustainable path. But it's really an abstract mark. And what allowed us to do an abstract mark in this case is the name Conservation International is very descriptive. So there's no question about what, what space they're in and what they do. It's extremely descriptive. So it allowed us to do a mark that's abstract and is not illustrative at all. It's actually the opposite of the mark that they had. So when we brought it in front of, so we had convictions that this mark was the right one for them, but they didn't agree with us at all. What the hell does it mean was the question. And they're a bunch of scientists. I mean, they do amazing work, but they were like, we had this gorgeous painting and you're telling us to go with a circle and a line, that doesn't make any sense. And this started a journey of 6 months to try to make a case to this. And, so we explained to them, like, the logo is not communication. The logo is not the end of all communications about you. In fact, it always shows up in context, in the context of, a beautiful photograph of, a forest or the ocean. And we even designed a series of posters to show them that this can be a device that can help communicate this in symbiotic relationship between people and the resources, people and nature. We usually say never put a picture in a logo, but this mark is so simple that we realized that it could take it. It could work. So, we thought that surely will make the case, but they were not, they and we had many conversations back and forth. And finally, after 6 months, what really did it is an idea that we had to maybe produce a simple piece of motion graphics. We teamed up with a studio here in New York called Thornburg and Forster. And this animation that actually started with a monkey in the tree, but really ended up with an array of images that have to do with everything else that they're focused on, kind of gave them the sense that, maybe less is more. Maybe the simple archetypical mark can stand for everything that they're doing, including the focus on humans, including, everything that goes into their new mission. And I think also tying it into their history, starting with the monkeys, somehow, gave them the final push. And then they said yes. And that was kind of magic. There was a lot of trepidation when they first were going to flip the switch. We got calls the afternoon of, from the people in charge saying like, oh, people coming into my office and asking me, are we really changing the logo? And, we're super scared. But once they went for it, it's just worked wonderfully for them. And that's the testament to, the power of a simple mark that, if you go all in and you're steadfast and you're not scared, there's a big payoff there.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic story. And it's interesting that a piece of motion graphics was the thing that sealed the deal. I could not help but to think of something that I heard Tony Robbins say before, which is you want to be able to build rapport with somebody. You have to connect something that they know with something that they don't know. And so they know their tropical rainforest with a monkey hanging in the tree. Mm-hmm. And then you show them a mark like this. And it's beautiful in simplicity, but it's so foreign to them that they can't figure out what the heck that is. Mm-hmm. And so then you build that bridge between what they knew, the monkey in the tree via motion graphics, and how it animated and transformed into the globe. And there's a little lens flare, and it completes a circle. The type comes in very elegantly, and the green bar, kind of the path forward, writes itself underneath it. So there's a tip for you guys. Hire a great motion design firm to help you close that gap. But most of the time, I think people just react to things that they just don't know or are unfamiliar with. So build a bridge.
It's also, everything you said is absolutely true. And it's also showing them that they can have a rich expression using that device. That it's not, they're not constrained to that simple mark, because people are often really scared of the simplicity, as you said in the beginning of the conversation. Is this all we have to say? And I think that just any way that you can demonstrate that the mark is a device that can help, facilitate expression, but is not the totality of the expression.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Okay, Matthew, I have more questions, but I'd like to take an opportunity to address anything that's really hot on YouTube right now.
Yeah, there's a question from Divad. I mean, I think it's very evident that you're very good at being quite. Oh, let me wake that up. At being pretty intelligent in terms of how you solve a very complex problems for your clients. And I'm curious, do you have any dream clients? Like, do you have any clients that you would love to spend time with and help rework their brand?
Do you want me to name one?
If you want, if you have something off the
People
top
on the
of your
internet
head.
always want to know.
Always want to know.
They
that
always want to know that kind of question.
Yeah.
Who's your dream client? For some
Yeah.
reason, that's what they always ask.
Capital One Bank.
Capital One Bank.
Really? Why
And
is that?
it's been for a while. I think they really need the help. I think they're a great company. They're actually really, like they're super technology forward and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't see that from their logo. Their logo looks outdated. So it's time.
I love it. I love that answer because a lot of creatives, I think, come from this space of, well, it's a cool company and, they're so creative and artistic and I want to make it look even cooler. But I love that you're tackling it from the perspective, well, they're a great company and they have a huge problem to solve in terms of communication and identity. So I would love to do that for them. So I love your answer.
What else, Matthew?
Let's see.
I'm busy typing notes because soon I'm going to have to wrap the show and there's just too much stuff for me to recap here. So I need a little bit more time to finish my notes here.
Yeah, I mean, I think with all of these stories, it's very interesting how you have a pretty strong sense of, okay, once you've finished it and you feel very good about the functionality of a logo, you're able to push that through in many different ways to sell that to the client. I'm curious if there's if there's a formal process that you guys practice over there in terms of creating identities that might be helpful for our audience to understand.
Sure. There's no formal process. We don't draw matrices and we don't, have like mood boards. We never do that. But there is a pretty strict process that we follow. And the main thing is you never do anything. You never put pencil to paper before you heard from the client, before you really immerse yourself in their world. And, in the beginning, we really think of ourselves as a sponge, trying to absorb as much as possible about their industry, about their competition, about their vision and their mission and who they are and who they want to be and who might there be in the future. And all of this kind of feeds into our, ideas come up during conversation. So sometimes, we would sit in an interview because that's how we start with interviews with people. Mm-hmm. And, they think we're taking notes, but actually we're sketching. And, the weirdest thing would bring, an idea or inception of a concept. But that's really great. But the reason you have to listen is that at the end of a couple of months of exploration, we end up with, thousands of sketches sometimes. Mm-hmm. And then how do you sit through them? And how do you determine which is the most appropriate, which is, right for them, and which is like something that you just like visually and is not appropriate to them at all? Because we are very disciplined about only showing the client options that are good for them. And that is something that I have to, credit Ivan with. You always say, never put in front of a client something that you can't live with if they pick, because they're going to choose that one and then we'll be blamed for it. And that's kind of, since then, it's always kind of like the most important moment is when we come together to look at designs. And, and there's sometimes that gets heated because if there's something up there that one of us likes and the other one can't live with, if they pick, then, sometimes there's sparks. But ultimately, we always come around to, mutual respect. It's, that's kind of the basic tenet of, being able to live, to work together. And that process of constantly looking together, talking together, making sense of things. We are very concerned with arm waving. That Conservation International mark is not the world. It's a circle. And we have to be very cognizant of that. It is not the picture of the world. It's a circle. And if you realize that, you have to have some humility also about, and then you can understand how you can bring your client along to see it as the world.
Mm-hmm.
And that will get them there. Because if you come in and you're just mesmerized by your own idea, it's very hard to speak to their listening and understand where is the issue. Mm-hmm. So we try to do, we try to be very rational about it, to look at the functionality of it. And that's kind of the process. And, applying it to the various applications, we're coming back full circle to that. That's how we vet the designs. And I will say, we hang them on the walls. We come in the morning. We see, did this get better overnight? Did this get old overnight? And we really try to make sure that we're not going to put something in place that they'll have to replace very quickly.
Mm. That's fantastic.
I have a bunch of questions here coming on online from the YouTube channel here, and I just want to ask, maybe you can give us really quick answers because I want to blast through as many of these as possible. And here's a question for you from ArtoXCO or something like that. The thing is, people have this tendency to say that this resembles that. So the Conservation International logo, he's saying it resembles an on button. How do you respond to that?
Sure. So remember I said about the slides that we put in the beginning of the presentation, mm-hmm. Never enough at first sight, the logo is not about what you like or dislike. So another one of those slides is, it just says, it reminds me of ...
Nice.
And that is a word of warning, because when we see something new, it's human nature to, our mind doesn't like new things. Mm-hmm. So it immediately tries to associate it with something we know. And that's completely natural, and it's a completely natural reaction, and we do it all the time. And oftentimes, when you then put them side by side, they actually don't look the same at all. And our response is always, that's something that's going to go away with time. When you get used to it, when it becomes familiar to you, those associations will stop happening. Now, of course, some things look similar to other things. If you look at the logo for Chanel and for Gucci, mm-hmm. they're almost the same thing. And they were created, less than a decade apart. They still live together side by side in the same industry. Another example is the red star that is used by Heineken and is used by Macy's. And it's exactly the same silhouette and exactly the same color. And they live side by side in harmony without a problem. So, of course, we do our best to create original marks. But, similarities are inevitable. And we just make sure that within the industry, they can own that silhouette.
Mm-hmm. Perfect answer. Thank you very much. Ina Vinchenko wants to know, how do you land clients?
Land clients. I have to say, Ivan and Tom, over the decades established a very strong reputation. And it's kind of like, diffused into the internet in the 90s. And now people just come to us from all over the world. And, oftentimes, it's an RFP that we have to, submit credentials or whatever. Sometimes people come and ask for work on spec as part of a RFP because they think that they're fabulous and people should just do free work for them. Never do that. We never do that. And nobody listening should ever do that. And I hope that, that is something that just goes away from the world, because to ask a designer to do free work is just not fair. With advertising and in architecture, it's very different. Advertising, they have to do a pitch, because mm-hmm. then if they win the job, they land, a contract that is ongoing and they make a whole lot of money. Same thing with architects. They land a project, they have years of a project that they can bill hours, until whatever. With design, especially with identity design, all the work is done up front to arrive at that mark. So why should we do it for free? There's no reason to do that. And I don't think anybody, even in a small office, should agree to do that. The one thing I would say is that talk to them explain to them that it makes no sense for them either, because if you engage a bunch of designers to do a logo for you for free, obviously, they're not going to have the right access to ask all the questions, and also to push back sometimes, as you saw from some of the stories, to get them to the right place. So the only way to do this properly is to engage one designer or a firm, and to forge a meaningful relationship between the designer and the client. So then, there's always a back and forth, and you have to find somebody that you trust and somebody that you also listen to if they want to offer an expert advice.
Mm-hmm. Well, it seemed that it would go against your rule number one, which is it's never love at first sight. So pitch says you must fall in love at first sight. And it seems like the reason why you're able to do such good work that endures over time is it requires you to have a relationship with a client. As you're talking about with Conservation International, it took 6 months of talking and convincing and going back and forth and exploring before they signed off and said, yep, that's what we want to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, absolutely. And that's why we also insist to meet with top decision maker right off the bat in the beginning of an engagement. Mm-hmm. And you'll be surprised how many big corporations, the marketing people come to us and they're like, yeah, we want you to work on our logo, but the CEO is too busy and, you really can't meet him right now. Mm-hmm. And we're like, no way. We have to meet with him right in the beginning. So not just to get his input, which is super important, right? Mm-hmm. But because he's going to make the decision at the end. We can't meet him for the first time when we bring a bunch of designs he's never seen in his life, like, a carpet salesman trying to show you swatches. No, It has to be a relationship that he sees who's working on his identity, and he learns to trust us. Mm-hmm. So then when we come back, we can make a recommendation and he's going to listen.
That's awesome.
Perfect. Matthew, I think we've dropped so much information. I mean, I know personally I can have this conversation with you forever.
Yes.
But it seems like you've preemptively answered so many questions on the internet. I think you've done a good service today, Sagi, in terms of trying to move the conversation forward for what a good logo design is and how you should present it and how you should build a relationship with your client, and it's about the long term. So I'm going to do my best to try to summarize the show. We'll come back to you in a second, but let's see if I can do this, okay? So this is Tom and Ivan. So I pulled this from Ivan. I think it's Ivan. He said, symbols don't make it clear what you do. It makes it clear who they are. Mm-hmm. The less they say, the logos and the symbols, the better. We have to understand what our clients are, and it's not necessary what they tell us. I think that kind of sums up the entire philosophy and spirit. And in terms of what makes for a good identity, if it's appropriate, if it's distinctive, and if it's simple. Now, here's all the notes I took during the call. So don't take no for an answer. That's how you got in the door, and you were very persistent. And once you got into the firm, you're first in and last out, and that's how you stood out. Don't wait to be asked. I hope I spelled her name correctly, from Lori Anderson, your commencement speaker.
No, but that's okay.
Is it L-O-R-I-E or L-A? Okay, whatever. I will fix it at some point. Go where you are needed most. And a logo is about capturing a core idea and the feeling. Does it survive the doodle test? Is it memorable enough that somebody can sketch it after looking at it? Mm-hmm. And you're trying to find that balance between being distinctive and simple, making sure that it's uncomplicated but not generic. And this was a big one for me. Logo is not communication, it's identification. So think of the logo more as a period at the end of a sentence. Mm-hmm. And counterintuitively, simplicity is the hardest thing to achieve because you want to make something simple but ownable. And you talked a lot about finding the right client and also staying away from the wrong client. And if the wrong client is somebody who cannot appreciate how important a logo is to their business, that's not something that you want to pursue. And the point of the logo is to endure well into the future, and it requires expertise. There's more on that in a little bit. What do the biggest brands do? This is the way that you're able to respond to somebody who's like, I want it to be more complicated or more interesting or ornate or decorative. And then you can say, well, what do the biggest brands do? How do they identify themselves? Is their trademark simple or is it complicated? And then what do you want to do with your logo, and what kind of company do you want to have? and you just don't believe in market testing anything because it's meaningless, because it's purely subjective, and we need to shift the conversation to being more objective. So it's not about what you like or dislike. It's about what works. Does it function? And I love this one. I'm going to be using this for sure. It's going to be showing up in future episodes here. Is whenever you want to talk about money and you're having a difficult time, just take the cost and divide it by the years used, and it seems really affordable at that point. Sometimes what you need to do is to show what's possible. How can the trademark facilitate an expression, especially if you're making a mark that's very simple? Only show clients work that is good for them. Otherwise, they're more likely to pick something that you all hate. And insist on talking to the decision maker. So some of the golden gems here from your presentation, the warnings that you give out, it's never love at first sight. It's going to take time. And I love this part too. I'm going to be using this. It reminds me of, that will kind of preemptively stop them from even bringing that up. And I hate that. That bugs me. It reminds me of, everything reminds you of something, but how's that going to help move this conversation forward? Okay. Sagi, are you on Twitter at all?
Our office is.
Okay, that's what I thought. I try to find you, and I cannot find you. You don't strike me as a social media kind of guy.
I'm not.
Okay, all right. So we're going to wrap up the show here. So before we say goodbye, hey guys, congratulations for making it all the way to the end of this episode. Reward yourself by hitting like, subscribe, and hitting that bell. Thank you very much, everybody, for tuning in today, and especially to our sustaining members, and of course, Sagi Haviv. And he's not going to check this, but somebody at the office will. It's at CGH NYC is in New York City, and you guys can check out all their wonderful, glorious, famous, iconic, memorable work at cghnyc.com. Thank you very much, Sagi. I'm going to say goodbye to you. That's the end of their show.
Woo. Good job. Thank you so much.
Wow,
Sagi.
that's so dense,
Awesome.
so good.
Yeah.
I'm going to play some music to take us out.